very difficult to extrapolate all this research data into what works for you. And I think, the N=1 stuff has a great deal of value. And a lot of the scientists will dismiss that because they say, well, it's anecdotal, it doesn't apply to the population, but it applies to the person that it's relevant to.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni.com are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science co-author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer and founder of Bay.com, Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross, who's also been a guest on the podcast. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention there is a DIY course. So this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regime. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's HITUNI.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10 for 10% discount. Thank you for your support. This episode is brought to you by my former podcast guest, friend, and health and sleep coach, Alex Fergus. Alex is a passionate health and sleep coach and has worked with hundreds of clients from all walks of life to help them transform their body composition, health, and energy level. Alex is an accomplished athlete representing New Zealand in rowing, winning national bodybuilding titles, and breaking powerlifting records. He's absolutely ripped and he's strong as an ox, and has won the Paleo FX Real Fit competition 2 years running against some of the most fierce competition around. The first time round, he won the competition training only 15 minutes per week. Alex attributes much of his success to his pursuit of incremental improvement in every aspect of his health and performance. He's one of the most obsessive biohackers I know, constantly optimizing every aspect of his mind and body for better results. As a former chronically sleep-deprived young adult, Alex pays close attention to his sleep and has invested heavily to optimize his own sleep quality for maximum benefit. He's devoted much of his time to researching how to improve sleep and has been featured on numerous podcasts and wrote extensively on the subject, and he knows his stuff. With that in mind, Alex is giving away a free 4-part sleep improvement series with tips that will revolutionize your sleep quality and help you fall asleep faster to give you more energy, improve body composition, and better all-around well-being. To get access to his free 4-part sleep improvement series, go to 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/Alex. That's 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/Alex and sign up now. What's up, guys? I am Lawrence Neal, and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior. I'm pumped to bring this one to you today after listening to The Last of the Mohicans soundtrack on repeat and getting loads of shit done. This podcast is my mission to optimize productivity in health, career, business, and lifestyle by interviewing the most effective people around today. My guests include medical physicians, world record holders, biohackers, high-intensity training specialists that rarely get interviewed, athletes, New York Times bestselling authors, life hackers, startup founders, etc., etc. My next guest is Dr. Sean Baker, who joins me for round 2. There were so many questions that I didn't get to ask during the first interview, so it was a real honor and treat to have another opportunity to really dig into Sean's diet, his training, his thoughts on health, etc., and asking your questions. Sean is a board-certified orthopedic surgeon, world record holder, and zero-carb athlete, which basically means he just eats meat. He's one of my favorite people on the internet. His Twitter account is incredibly interesting to follow, and he's been doing the zero-carb diet for near on 8 months now, I believe, with some staggering results. He's broken multiple world records. He's dunking a basketball, deadlifting 500 pounds of repetitions at 50 years old. He's got a very athletic background. He's played rugby semi-professionally and set various records and won championships in various weightlifting competitions. On top of that, he served in the US Air Force as a lieutenant colonel and was a nuclear weapons launch officer. And he's just a fascinating person with a really interesting background and very sharp intellect and very, very fun to talk to. So this round 2 was epic. We covered so much, and we'll give you some highlights now. So we cover Sean's thoughts on his definition of health, or the definitions of health, which are obviously highly ambiguous these days. We talk about the detrimental effects of prolonged sitting. We really dig into his diet, and I mean we really dig into it. So we talk about grain-fed versus grass-fed meat, and how to eat on the road, how long it takes to adapt to zero carb, Sean's drinks of choice, how eating a zero carb can help reduce decision fatigue, and how to pick foods in the supermarket without driving yourself mad looking for the perfect food whilst trying to stay within budget. Talk about how to deal with social situations. We discuss his thoughts on protein intake and the thoughts on general protein consumption recommendations. We talk about N=1 self-experimentation, his thoughts on electromagnetic fields and cold showers, and much, much more. This was mega, and I think you're going to love it, especially if you're obsessed with the details like I am and you want to know exactly how Sean thinks and operates when it comes to fitness and diet. So for all the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/podcast. And at the end, don't forget to hang around for your free gift. So without further ado, please enjoy this round 2 with Sean Baker. Sean, welcome back to Corporate Warrior. Thanks for coming on the show again. It's good to have you back. I wanted to kick off this podcast just talking a little bit more about, I guess, definitions and those points you pinged over to me in email, which are quite interesting. And one of those was, the definition of health, which is, I think, a very ambiguous term and something which isn't very well defined for a lot of people. So did you want to elaborate on that and just share your thoughts on, I guess, where you were going with that point?
Yeah, I think it is kind of interesting, and it is somewhat ambiguous. And I think a lot of us have really kind of lost sight of what it really means. I think, when we look at the medical community, which I'm part of, I mean, we've come to define the definition of health via a series of different laboratory values, different tests that we can run. And we kind of just don't sometimes even look at who's standing in front of us. We just look at these are what your labs say, this is what your MRI scan showed. And so that sort of by proxy has become the definition of health, and people have bought into that. And so you have people out there that, I mean, they get on a new diet and a new exercise regimen, and by all accounts, they feel healthy and they're feeling good. And then they go to the doctor and they get a blood test, and their HDL was 5 points lower than it was 6 months ago, and then the world collapses for them. And they sit there and they harangue, and there's a lot of anxiety that produces, and I think that mentality is more problematic than it solves. I mean, I think there's some general things we can look at, but I mean, I had a sort of an argument with a vegan that said health was a BS term, not even to use it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You're another physician, and you can't even attempt to define health. I mean, for me, the way I look at things, I think, if as physicians if we were accountable for how far can a patient walk, how fast can they walk, how many, how quick can they sit up from a stand, what their body composition was like, how much, not everybody can do this, but how much can they lift certain weight percentages and stuff like that. If that's what we were accounted for or accountable to, then it wouldn't be just here's a pill that'll lower your cholesterol, or here's a pill that'll lower your average A1C, when we know the outcomes for doing that may not make a hill of beans difference anyway. And so if we were accountable for, let's see what kind of performance you can do, then doctors would have to prescribe lifestyle measures. It's harder to do that, and it takes some more thought, and it's not, a 15-minute conversation. Right now, it's like, okay, Mrs. Jones, here's your lab test. Well, cholesterol's a little high. Here's a pill that treats that. And that's what we've kind of unfortunately devolved into. And I think people have come to expect that. And people think that if they go to the doctor, even if all signs show that they're morbidly obese or something else, they'll say, well, I'm not a diabetic. My cholesterol's fine, so I'm great. And that to me is very, very misguided. And I think it's a problem. And I think, we have to step away from that.
Yeah. It's like almost like they feel like they get a green pass and then they can just revert back to bad habits until they have to, something comes up for them again and the doctor flags it.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, and again, I think you have to take your own health in your own hands. And if you're rolling the dice and thinking what you're doing is going to be okay just because you got lucky on a lab test, because it's very interesting. I think maybe we touched on this before. I know Dave Feldman with his Keto Dave and cholesterol drop experiment showing those lab tests are so variable anyway. It may depend on the alignment of the stars on how your cholesterol or whatever number you're looking at comes out at. And so if you're depending on that for, making your life choices on that, you may be in for a rude awakening later on.
Yeah, I was taught that, getting a blood test is very much like a snapshot in time. So like if you, like you say, it's based on the numbers can come out in a variety of ways depending on what happened in the previous 24 hours. Like if you had a very stressful event, for example. So the only way to really get useful data in that way, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert, is to have those tests done, pretty frequently over a pretty short period of time, maybe a few weeks to really get a realistic picture, or maybe a few months.
Well, even then, you're relying on what's in the blood and what's going on in the tissues may be something completely different. And so probably, I think things like the coronary artery calcium scan, that's at least a tissue diagnosis where you can look at that and see what's going on with your heart vessels. You can do tissue biopsies. The problem with that is it hurts, it's expensive, and it's not easy to obtain, and most people aren't going to sign up for that. So hey, let's stick a little needle there and get some blood off. And no matter if that information is really that helpful, we're going to use it. And so that's one of the problems we fall into. And so, that's where, I think you have to look at the whole person. You can walk down the street and say that person is not very healthy. You can look at them. It doesn't matter what their blood shows. If you see a 75-year-old guy in the park running sprints and doing chin-ups, you're going to say, hey, that guy's doing pretty good. And you've got the same 75-year-old lady walking down the park with a walker. It looks like she could fall over with the next stiff breeze. It doesn't matter what their lab scores show. It's pretty intuitively obvious, but we seem to disregard that.
That's a really interesting observation, because the former is so rare, but it doesn't have to be. And it's so rare. I mean, you're a real kind of outlier, and you shouldn't be. I mean, you are an outlier in that you're 6'5", and you're sort of I guess in some ways genetically predisposed to be a great athlete. But do you know what I mean? Just in terms of actually seeing someone over 70 or something like that with real physical capability is so rare to see, and it's sad. How do you think that this is a big question, but how we can reverse that? Is it, like you say, just educating the individual on staying out of the belly of the beast and the healthcare system and looking after their own health and kind of empowering them, or is there more to it than that?
Well, I think certainly it is imperative that you look after your own health. I mean, your doctor, I mean, most doctors are very well intentioned. They're good, smart people, but quite honestly, the whole system is not set up for us to provide optimal health. It's just, if you're sick, what can we do? What pill, what procedure? Maybe we can give you some advice to sort of mitigate that. But I mean, if you really want to age well, if you want to be healthy as you possibly can be, you're not going to find it by going to your general practitioner. And the problem is that information that you would otherwise look to places on the internet, different gurus, we don't know, what they're really telling us is true. And so we don't know that. So you have to kind of experiment yourself and see. And I think that, there's some components that go into that. Certainly your diet is a huge one, as I've discovered over the last, decade or so. But I mean, how you exercise, what you do exercise wise, how you manage stress in your life, how you get sleep, how you interact with other people. All those things are very important and essential for that. But you can kind of see, I mean, if you look at, if I argue that, from an aging perspective, some of these senior athletes that are breaking world records at 75 and 80 and 90 years old are probably a good role model, then we have to say, well, where do you fall relative to those guys from health? It doesn't matter if you live to 105, if you spend 20 years demented, going to the bathroom on yourself and can't walk across your living room. I mean, that to me is not a definition of health. And some people are out there saying, well, it's all about longevity. And I think you have to look at function and preserving function as long as possible. And if you can run a 100-meter sprint at 95 years of age, I think you've won largely. I think that's a pretty darn good goal. And if you only live to 98 instead of 102, I don't think that's a big deal.
No, I completely agree. Sorry,
it's unfortunately it's rare, and I agree it doesn't have to be rare. I mean, it's we have a lot of things that go against making that a possibility. Basically our food supply, in large part, sort of, you have to go out of your way and eat like a sort of a weird person, and eat in sort of unsocially acceptable ways to avoid some of that. In many cases, you have to prioritize your health and exercise, and sort of limit consumption of consumable goods and spending your time on those things. Because I think if you're chasing the newest car, the newest clothes, and whatever, newest video game, you're going to leave something out, and often that's health.
No, I agree. You noted on your email about the lack of need, in your opinion, for dietary supplements. This is something that I spoke with Ted about. I think we touched on actually as well in our last interview. Obviously, it's interesting because, you've got some people who people respect really touting certain supplements and, trying to demonstrate their value through showing here's a scientific literature that says you need to supplement with cod liver oil and X supplement. Now, are you of the opinion that you think they're completely unnecessary? Do you think there's any value in them? What's your stance on supplements?
So I get a lot of sort of feedback and grief about this, but I think it's very context dependent. And so I think if your natural diet leads to deficiencies, and we can argue which diets do and don't do that, and we can argue the relative merits of the whole recommended daily allowance, or the DRIs as they're now called, how that was determined, and what population it was supposed to serve, and what their actual goals were, and largely their population health goals. And just like the dietary guidelines, they're not designed for individuals. And so, if your diet is deficient in X nutrient and is clearly evident by some sort of clinical signs or symptoms, that's certainly reasonable. If you live in a place where you don't get much sunlight, it certainly makes sense to go outside and get some vitamin D or supplement it, perhaps. Although you can look at some of these Arctic populations who've got very little sunlight a lot of the year, and they seem to do well with regard to vitamin D. You can, if you have a medical condition, there's a lot of people that have I use a gastric bypass patient as an example. Those people, they've got part of their digestive tract that's gone, and so they can't absorb certain nutrients. So they have to compensate for that. There are other people that have malabsorption syndromes, and those people are going to have to. And so there's people that certainly, will benefit from that. But I think there's other people that don't need that, and it's not. If the position is that every human being in 2017 has to take supplements to be healthy, I have an issue with that. I don't think that's true. I mean, I don't, and I would argue I'm very healthy, and there's lots of others like me. And so, to posit that the only way you can be healthy is to take a supplement, I think is misleading. Now, potentially could they be beneficial? I think maybe so. I don't know. I'm not convinced. And we've got all these sort of quote unquote longevity experts that will tell you this is how you're going to live to be 120. Well, none of them have lived to be 120 yet. And so when there's somebody walking around, and when there's a bunch of guys walking around 120 that are in great shape and looking good and lifting weights and doing that stuff, and they say that's because I took this supplement, then I'm going to be convinced. But just because you do some rat study or some cell study, you show some associational study that says maybe berberine will reduce LDL by 2%, 5%. That stuff to me is not real impressive because, you can look at it a different way and say, what did it cause negatively? We've got this assumption that, this supplement may be good and therefore we're going to do some studies to prove it. Well, you could also say, well, why don't we just look at that and see if it has any negative consequences and balance those out and see what the long-term outcome is at? Because, like I said, we just don't have those people. We've been, they've been searching, since Ponce de Leon and probably before, they've been searching for the fountain of youth, and people have still been looking for it. And guys like Aubrey de Grey and those guys are still doing this stuff. And there ain't nobody living to 120 yet. I mean, our lifespan is extended, over the years through modern medicine and nutrition and healthcare, I think. But this Dave Asprey, I'm going to live to 180. So here's 150. I don't know if you saw it today. So I swallow 150 supplements a day. I mean, that to me is comical. And the people that buy into that, I mean, it's the whole, I've got a bridge to sell you somewhere type of thing. And people do it, and he makes good money at that. And so, like I said, I think I'm not convinced. If somebody could convince me by doing what we talked about, then I'm fine. Then fine.
So how do you go about kind of learning, I guess, more about this stuff? Are you always just surfing PubMed and hone some? Because I find PubMed. I mean, I'm using it more, and definitely reading more literature these days, which the listeners will be glad to hear. But I do find it intimidating to do a search for good quality research. And how do you use those sorts of I guess PubMed and other websites to
well, I mean, if I have a particular interest in a topic, then I'll search for any kind of relative literature on that. The problem with PubMed is you can almost have any sort of position and you can find studies that support it. If I wanted to say that strawberries are good for me, I could find some information that showed that, and at the same time, I could find some stuff that says that we don't know. And so, the problem is I think a lot of people will spend, months and months and months and dedicate all this time to searching the literature and trying to figure out the right answer. And they come away just as confused for them when they start. And then a new study will come out, a month later after they think they've solved it. And they're like, oh, wait, we got to rethink this. And so I think, like I said, I think it's helpful to reference the literature, but I don't think it's crucial. I think you can learn stuff about yourself without a computer. I mean, you really can. I mean, you can get in there and say what works for me, what doesn't. How can I be objective about that? How is my sleep? How is my libido? How is my energy? What is my performance in the gym like? What is my mood like? And so all those things impact health. And I think you're more likely, if you spend time researching yourself and doing that stuff, you're going to get more benefit than you are spending hours and hours on PubMed just so you can win an argument. Because there's people that they just want to, there was a guy, I can't remember, he called it Google ping pong. Somebody makes an argument and then they pull up a Google study and somebody else does it and they pull up another study, and it gets monotonous and it gets boring, and no one's ever right. And I don't think the point of doing this is to prove you're right. I think the point of this is to how can you get as healthy as you want to be. And, like I said, we can talk about diet a little bit later. I think there's some easier strategies than some people employ. And I think the diet I'm on is a very good way to sort things out. You minimize the variation in the variables and the confounders. And then if you want to, and if you feel good, like I do, I'm on an all meat carnivore diet. I'm in now, this is going into my 8th month, but and I feel as good as I've ever been, and I can't remember when. And so when I look at that, then I say, well, maybe I want to add, fruit back in. If I do that and I feel a little worse, and I'm like, well, maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe I'll only eat fruit once in a while, for a social reason, but my performance is going to go down. And I know that. Same thing with alcohol. If I drink a glass of wine, and for me, it's even, I kind of wonder about dairy, because I know if I indulge in too much dairy, I may not sleep so well that night. And I kind of see that pattern over and over again. And then you can look at other people that note the same thing, and you can kind of slowly figure out what really works for you. And then you can kind of use that as a baseline. And then you can make your decisions based on that, not based on some Google rat study, because, somebody's going to come pull that up and they're going to say, and it's almost comical, and it's sad. It really is.
It's interesting because the literature is obviously quite intimidating to people, and I it's funny because I remember talking to Drew Bay about this, who I had on a podcast right at the beginning. And he was saying to me, when we were talking about the scientific literature, I was saying, I can read the abstracts, but to actually take the time to read a full study, the methods, the whole thing, top to bottom, is a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time. And like you say, it might not even be that productive anyway. I remember looking at, I think, can't remember the guy's name now, I'm blanking, but the guy that tried to disprove the insulin hypothesis, Gary Taubes' insulin hypothesis. Kevin Hall, that's it. So
I don't think he tried to prove it. I think that was his conclusion, that it didn't work, but I don't know if that was his intention. That was his conclusion. I don't know if that was his intention necessarily. I think Gary Taubes might disagree. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, that's bad for me. I felt like there was a confirmation bias in play from Kevin Hall's point of view, but yeah, I shouldn't say it like that. But yeah, it was, Ted and I, we discussed that, Ted Naiman and I, and we pulled it apart, and it's just very intimidating. And maybe, like you say, the best way to do this is n=1 and just control your own variables and objectively assess, how you feel and react and sleep and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Well, and that's like I said, you can pull any study, any sort of well-recognized study, you're going to have detractors, and there are going to be people that make very, very intelligent arguments, and you're not going to be able to sort of think, well, what's the right answer? Even with the studies, you can look at it, people are going to interpret it multiple ways. Even the author's conclusions, they'll say, well, they shouldn't have concluded what they concluded. And so I think it's very difficult to extrapolate all this research data into what works for you. And I do think that the n=1 stuff has a great deal of value. And a lot of the scientists will dismiss that because they say, well, it's anecdotal, it doesn't apply to the population, but it applies to the person that is relevant to. And I think that's important. If you don't mind, that's one of the things we have this is, relatively new, that we have this great interconnectedness of people via social media now. You have, numbers like you've never had before connected. You have, hundreds of thousands and even in the millions of people. And you can harness that n=1 stuff, and you could get, with huge numbers, you could get some pretty compelling data pretty quickly. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to kind of be involved with right now. I just kind of started this n=many thing where you could say, I just people ask me questions. Hey, do cold showers increase your testosterone? In the literature, you look at the literature, and it's not really noticed. There's a few studies, a few people, and we can't really say. What you could do is say, okay, let's get 1,000 people. Have them all, take a testosterone test, at the beginning, and then take cold showers for a month, and then just check and see, or do it right after the shower, and then you can get that information very quickly, probably very cheaply, without an NIH grant, and people could access that. And so I think that is potentially a very powerful tool. Now, it's not as simple as that, and there's some other things that have to, things that need to be done, I think, and hopefully I can help do those things. But I think we can answer a lot of these questions that aren't dependent upon industry bias. Most of the research out there is funded by drug companies, at least when we look at health and food companies, because they have the money to do so. And there's great scientists out there, and I don't believe they're unethical people, but there's undeniable bias in what gets paid for and what the questions they want to answer. And so if I want to answer a question about, can people be carnivores and live fine? No one really wants to pay for that. And so we can do it through social media. And I think we can hopefully use that as a viable source for people to get information. You could do the same thing with training, your HIIT training. You could say, hey, let's run 100 people and do this HIIT protocol for, 6 weeks and compare them to, you still there, other people, and go there. It's interesting.
Yeah, completely. Just out of interest, have you noticed that cold showers increase testosterone at all?
Well, like I said, I think there's some benefits to it. There's a lot of, you can read about what the perceived benefits. I think there's some benefits to your skin. It doesn't pull off a lot of the oils from your skin and hair. That's clear. I think there's a pretty significant mood elevation I've noticed with that. It's kind of funny. My little daughters, when I started taking ice baths, they wanted to do what Daddy does, and so they wanted to do it too. So I let it. I didn't want them to do it too long, but they did it for about 5 minutes. And they got out, and they were literally they couldn't stop laughing. They felt they were euphoric. I mean, so I think there's some mood elevation aspect to it. I think it's pretty clear. I mean, I think it's, it's pretty refreshing. You wake up, I do it every day. I did it every day. I had one this morning. So I wake up, and it takes me about 10 seconds to sort of, even now after doing thousands of them, it takes me about 10 seconds to sort of, okay, I'm ready to go. Get in there. It sucks for about 2 or 3 seconds, and then you're kind of good, and then you feel fine. As far as elevation of testosterone, I don't really know. I mean, I think my testosterone, whatever level it is, I don't know what my numbers are, but I mean, I think it works pretty well. I mean, I think based on things like libido, based on energy, based on mood, based on athletic performance, the ability to get stronger, I think those things positively say that my testosterone is working, as it should be. Whether cold showers or not directly contribute to that, I don't know. I know it may convert some brown adipose tissue, which may sort of indirectly help us with body composition, which then may help us with testosterone production. So maybe not directly, but maybe through some secondary sources. But I don't know. But that's something that could be tested. I mean, it's, if you, like I said, you get 1,000 people go take cold showers and then get their testosterone drawn, you might be able to answer that question pretty quickly.
I think you've got a mass Twitter experiment on the cards there, Sean. I mean, you've already got one with everyone doing zero-carb, but...
Well, I think, I don't know about massive yet. I mean, I think and obviously that's going to be critiqued all to hell. I mean, the vegans will go to town on that and pick it apart. And I know that's going to happen. I know that's going to be, that's no big deal. But I mean, I think it is helpful to change, to at least change the discussion. And the narrative is, I think, been unfairly skewed towards all meat is bad, all fruits and vegetables are good. And that's just no knowledge. And we don't even have to question that. And all the studies are there just to try to prove those things rather than say maybe that hypothesis is wrong in the first place, which I think it is.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff. Okay, so I just wanted to move on to some questions about exercise. We'll come back to diet because I've got some kind of almost kind of like the kind of questions you get on Twitter. Sean, shall I do this? Shall I do that? What if I eat this?
Sure.
Some of those. But anyway, starting with exercise, you said something on Twitter, and I just wanted to make sure. Well, I wanted to clarify and understand it. You tweeted, you said, in my opinion, the next evolution for the general population will involve the preservation of speed and the ability to accelerate via smart training. Right. I'm not sure if you've already expanded on this earlier, but can you just elaborate on what that means?
Right. So, I mean, I think, we had, I guess from the 1960s on, we had this big movement where everybody was doing aerobics. We had the Cooper Clinic, and we had the evolution of running and jogging, which wasn't big in the, before that, 1960s, 70s, and that's when the jogging craze sort of took off. And then we had the, the whole Jane Fonda aerobic stuff, and we kind of suffered through that for about 3 or 4 decades, and then people started saying, well, wait a minute, we need to actually have some muscle mass, and we need to do some strength training. So now we're in that. That's what's going on now. So now you have more and more people that are in there, doing deadlifts and squatting and using machines and doing HIIT training and that sort of stuff. And I think that's a good trend. I think that certainly is a step up from what it was. But I think, if I look at like what a child is capable of, kids come out there, they got great joints, their bones don't hurt, everything works. They're pretty new, they're like a new car versus an old clunker. And so, but what you look at what they do, I mean, they're running, they're jumping, they're playing, they're swinging from monkey bars, they're throwing stuff around. And I think if we can preserve that ability and that capacity, even into our 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and beyond, then I think that goes to health. And I think that's, one of the things, that I do in my training where I want to be able to, like I said, we talked about this, I want to be able to dunk a basketball still. I want to be able to broad jump 8 or 9 feet. I want to be able to, jump over a fence. Here's what I wanted. This is kind of interesting. So my little 4-year-old boy was at the beach yesterday with his little bike, and he's learning to ride his bike, and he wanted to race his mom. And, so she's my girlfriend. She's the same age as me, and she's also a carnivore now. But, he raced off and she just ran a sprint, sprinted right next to him. No warm up, no stretching, none of that stuff. And so we should have the capacity to be able to do that without having to spend 10 minutes on the treadmill, rolling ourselves with foam rollers, doing a, 5-minute dynamic warm up. We should be able to maybe not a full out Usain Bolt, I'm trying to break the 100-meter world record, but I should be able to run at a pretty quick pace without having to do all that stuff, without pulling muscles, without getting injured. And so I think that capacity for most people, if you ask most people to go out just without any warm up or prep to go out and run a sprint, they're not going to be able to do it. They're going to get hurt, or they're not even going to attempt it. And so if you can maintain that capacity, and I think you can, and I think diet impacts that. I think training impacts that as well. Then I think that is a very good thing to be able to do. You know, if you look at an old lion, you know, or any animal, if it can't run quick right away and has to warm up, it's basically dinner. You know, so I mean, as an animal, and I would argue we are animals, and if we lose those capacities, then, you know, granted we're humans and we live in society, and we've got all these sort of cushions around us to protect us from that stuff. But in general, slow, weak animals that can't move tend to die. And, you know, and so I think if you get in that, I mean, it's a sort of a simplistic way to look at it, but I mean, there's a lot of truth into that. And so if you can maintain those things, and I think there's certain training things that support that, then I think that's, you know, ideally a very good thing.
No, I understand what you mean. And, you know, I've moved to Ireland, and I want to talk to you a little bit about sitting, because I've been sitting a bit too much. And whenever I sort of broke into a jog, I was getting like a minor stitch, and I kind of noticed it. And I thought, why am I getting that? I never used to get that like this quickly. And then more recently, I've sort of reduced my sitting time, or at least breaking it up. You know, training pretty regularly, like resistance training, and then playing basketball. And then today, you saw my Twitter comment. You know, I sprinted to Aldi, which is a local supermarket, and I say sprint. It was like a hard run, but it was a good, you know, half mile, and I didn't need any warm up to do that. I just did it, and I felt great. And I didn't have that stitch, and I just wondered. You know, obviously that might not be related to the sitting, I don't know. But what's your views on? Obviously, there's this meme floating around at the moment. You know, sitting is the new smoking. What do you think about sitting? Do you think it's a very detrimental activity, or, you know, what's your stance on that?
Well, I mean, I think if you spend your whole life sitting, you know, and you know you're just sedentary, and you don't counteract that with exercise, yeah, it's probably sedentary. I mean, you know, they invented chairs 3,000 years ago. I mean, at least 3,000 years ago, we've had chairs. So people have been sitting for a long time. It's not like if you go back to 1960s, people didn't have desks they sat at. I mean, you look at any TV show, they've got desks, and presumably people sat at them, and presumably they worked there. You know, they worked an 8-hour day or whatever it was. And so I don't think sitting is some sort of new phenomenon in society. I think people have been sitting for a long time now. Again, you know, I think people are, in my view, it goes a lot back to diet still. I think there's so many people, maybe they're sitting and eating donuts, and maybe that's a donut. You know, it's like the same thing. If I go to McDonald's and order a single patty by itself, maybe I'm okay. But if I eat the burgers and the fries with that, then, you know, then maybe, you know, that's the problem. And, you know, and certainly you can say, well, if I sit for a long period of time in a pertinent position, I'm going to have, you know, some sort of joint contractures because I'm not using the full range of motion as much as it should be. I do agree that, you know, you should use full range of motion, you know, at least to occasionally. You know, if you're going to do squats, you know, if you're not doing full squats all the time, you should be doing them at least some of the time. But it could be that, you know, if our diet is cruddy, you know, and I think it is, then that causes problems with the local tissues. And then if you spend most of your time in a sitting position, then you might have problems, you know, around that mechanically. And then when you go to try to do other things, you know, those are where your issues are. But again, I think it's, you know, I think in isolation, probably sitting is probably, I mean, I'm sitting right now and I'm not worried about, you know, not being able to move later. So, yeah, I mean, I think it probably plays a role, but I don't think it's as big of a role as, I don't think it's a smoking. I don't think it's to the extent that you can say sitting is a new smoking. I think it's probably, you know, in combination with other things, it might be something you can try to, you know, not spend 10 hours a day sitting.
I hear what you're saying, and it is, like you say, highly context dependent as well, I suppose, to an extent. So let me say you take someone like you or I, someone who's fairly active, who has their diet dialed in. So you saying you don't think there's really much downside to maybe a 4 to 6 hours of sitting each day, assuming all of those other things? Do you?
Yes, I would say that. I would say yes. I think you probably can sit for a few hours a day, 4, 5, 6 hours a day. If you've got a good diet, good exercise regimen, you're getting good sleep, you control the stress in your life. I would say the likelihood of that being significantly detrimental is probably minimal.
Cool. Any new world records since we last spoke? Oh, there is
Uh,
one, isn't there? I think you.
well, I know well, I'm trying to remember how long it's been since we spoke. So I know I broke
Few weeks.
2 weeks. I think I broke. I think I rebroke the 500-meter rowing world record just by like a tenth of a second. I think it was 1:14.6. I went 1:14.5. It was interesting that day. It was kind of funny because I was, this. I talk about my diet and I think it helped in recovery. And so I went down there. I did a 1:14.6, which tied the world record. That sucks because you get down there, you do all this work, and you're like tied. So I got pissed off. I remember I went up. I took a cold shower. I ate another steak. I waited about 2 hours. I went back down there and did it, and then I broke it. So I was like, this guy's pissed off. And so, but I thought it was pretty cool that I could, if you've experienced a hard 500-meter row, it takes a lot out of you. And so I was pretty pleased to be able to turn around a couple hours later and one, tie the record and then beat it, subsequently. And then there's a guy named Gabe Rivera who is. I think he's part of this group called Ancient Gains. So he asked me if he could post a video of me breaking a world record, and I said, "Well, I'll just do another one for you." It'll give me a incentive to break another one. And so I was like, last week I was going to do that, and then I got, unfortunately, I got hit. I got hit by a bunch of bug bites at a hotel. I was at a hotel. I got bit up by bugs, and that sort of sets you back a little bit. And then my kid had a cold, and I got a little bit of a cold. So that week I was like, I can't do it. So I think like Monday, let's say Monday. Yeah, so last Monday or Tuesday, I went in and just did the 100-meter record because it only takes like 13 seconds. And so I broke, that record too. So I think two, and then I'll probably, hopefully break some more very quickly here soon. Maybe even today if I feel good.
What's next from an N=1 experiment point of view for you? So do you going to be done with rowing soon, do you think, or?
Well, here's the deal. So, I think I'll probably continue with rowing for, the short term, maybe a year or two. There's a couple other records. I know there's a 1,000-meter record, which I should be able to do. I just haven't tried it yet. It may take a few goes to get that. And then I'm just debating whether I want to go for the 2,000-meter record. That's what all these sort of the Olympic rowers sort of train for, and that's sort of what's your 2K row. And so I'm debating whether I want to pursue that or not. I think if I train correctly, I think I have the capacity maybe to do that, but again, the problem with that is at least by what most people would say, it takes a lot more endurance type training to do that. And I think if I do that, I might have to sacrifice from the strength end, and I'm really reluctant to sort of, give up all, I've spent 35 years getting stronger and sort of giving that away is really hard to do. Yeah. And so if I can, I might sort of test it out. And if I feel that I'm pretty close, then I might pursue that. But if not, then I'll do something else. I might, like I said, I really enjoyed throwing like track and field stuff. And so I might, pick up the discus again, or, go after the, some of the super weight and heavyweight throws in track and field might be. I'm also still pretty fast, and so I'm sort of eye these 60-meter, 100-meter sprints. I'm a little heavy for that, at 240. So maybe I drop 10 pounds and get a little leaner, and then pursue sprinting.
What's your 100-meter?
I think I've done one in the high 12 seconds. A couple of years ago, but I don't train for it, and at that time I was like 260 pounds. And so, I think I can get that probably under 12 seconds, with track spikes on and a coach and, the correct training. So I think, at 50, into the 50s, that's pretty competitive on a, national level. So that might be something that, generally, if I think I'll look at some sports, and if there's something I think that I can, potentially break either a national world record at, then that's something I'll pursue. I know powerlifting right now, I think I mean, I forgot about that because I think I certainly have the capacity to deadlift a national record at the 50 plus level. And so I may do that as just like a short term, train for it for a couple months, try to break a record and then go on to something else. But we'll just see what happens.
Cool. So moving on to some questions about diet. So these are kind of questions that are submitted, questions that were left over from last time. And I'm going to sort of ask these in, I guess, somewhat rapid fire fashion, but your answers don't have to be rapid fire.
Okay.
So this is an experiment. So, we spoke about this before in terms of like when you're picking your meat, you said you weren't that picky when it comes to grass-fed and grain-fed. You said how grass-fed was expensive, and you personally didn't think that the health benefits justified the increased cost. Now, that in mind, though, when you do pick a grain-fed steak or a conventional steak, however you want to call it, do you tend to go for a leaner cut because of that, or does that not factor into your decision at all?
No, the two things that factor into my decision are, one, how I think it's going to taste. And so I certainly have a preference for ribeye steaks, and if I can get them at a good price, I'll buy the whole store out. If it's kind of funny, I'll catch them at $5.50 a pound, and I'll just literally go in there and buy every steak in the store. And then if there's another chain a few miles away, I'll go to that store and buy every steak in the store in my freezer. I'd probably eventually I should just get a big buy a cow or something like that. But I mean, that's probably the biggest decision. And then the other thing is convenience. I wish I could say I was a gourmet cook and I could make all these sort of cheaper cuts of meat just taste delicious. I just don't have that capacity yet. Usually if I buy something that's really lean, it's going to be tough and chewy. And I should probably learn how to cook, basically. But I know I can make a ribeye taste pretty darn good. You throw it on the grill or sear it in a pan, and then hamburger a lot of times, just because if you can't cook hamburger, then you got real problems. So I mean, those are the two things, and then they taste really good to me. And I think most people have had those. Same thing like T-bones and porterhouse steaks. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those cuts or if they call them the same thing in the UK.
Yeah,
but yeah, so. And I keep saying UK because Ireland is not technically in the UK, correct?
That's correct.
No?
Yeah. Republic of Ireland.
I don't offend anybody. I mean, I know Ireland and in Wales, but so Ireland I know as they're separate. So that part of what do you want? What is the big? Do you have a collective term for the UK plus Ireland? Is there like the British Isles? I don't know.
Well, maybe. Do you know what? I'm embarrassed. I don't even know if there is a collective term because you have the UK and Northern Ireland.
Right, sure, yeah.
But obviously that's separate to the Republic of Ireland. So yeah, I'm learning what's politically correct. I've only just moved it. So.
Right. I don't want to sound like an offensive American by making a mistake. But let me ask you: Is Ireland part of the Brexit thing, or did they leave too, or are they still?
No. So Ireland are in the EU.
Okay.
It's just England and that are involved in Brexit. Sadly.
Right. So not a rapid fire answer, but yeah. So basically, I purely pick on what I know I'm going to like. That's how I make my decision. And like I said, I think that's if you're going to limit yourself to just eating meat, you should pretty damn well like what you're eating. And so I think that's and I think most people who do that, that's pretty much the advice they give them. I think it's all pretty good. If I really, really, really wanted to be lean and like 6% body fat, which I don't. I mean, I think there's from a performance perspective, I think when you get too lean, I think bodybuilders will tell you this, their strength will go down. They just don't feel as good. And so I want to, I don't want to be overweight or obese. I want to be in an athletic level of body composition and, perform at my maximum. And so, so I think if you want to do something that's kind of not sustainable and natural, then you can really, go lean and eat chicken breast and the stuff that typical bodybuilders do when they get ready for a contest. I mean, they just cut the fat out.
Yeah, low fat, low carb, high protein.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, but I mean, that's not sustainable long term. I don't think any bodybuilder would tell you they would eat a pre-contest, diet. In the last month of their diet year round, they would go crazy. So, but you can't do that. So, anyway.
How often do you eat grass-fed, organic? The top of the range type stuff.
I would say 10% of the time. If like a lot of time, my girlfriend who's like I think I just mentioned was recently switching over to this car. She was a vegetarian for a long time. When I met her, she was
interesting.
So over the last 5 years that we've been going out, she slowly watched me and converted, and so now she's basically saying, okay, I'm going to do a month of only meat, and she's been doing it and feeling great, which is encouraging. But yeah, she'll buy it like when she still buys that stuff, and I'll eat it. I don't really care that much. She buys it for our little boy we have together, because, and I think that's fine. I think, if you can, like I said, if you can afford it, then by all means, I think it's reasonable to do so. But I like I said, I just don't think the vast majority of people, at least in the U.S., where it's pretty expensive, and especially if that's all you eat. If I'm eating 4 or 5 pounds of meat a day, I mean, that if I had to eat grass fed, all that would run up to be a pretty expensive bill, and
Yeah.
I just don't think that's reasonable for everybody else to be able to do.
No, fair enough. So I had a question from a listener who's a fellow road warrior. I know you do a few miles
Right.
quite often, and he's asking questions around cooking protein, while you're traveling a lot. So how do you? I mean, you obviously you pop into Wendy's and order tons of beef burgers and bacon and cheese and stuff like that. But what about like when you're, I guess, taking food home? Is it the same principle? You just go and buy a ribeye steak and fry it up in the kitchen, or?
Yeah, it's going to depend on where you are and what you have access to. If you are, in a hotel a lot, a lot of times you can get a hotel with a little kitchenette, and you can just go to the grocery store and cook your own meal. I mean, that's, to make a ribeye steak, you need a pan, a stove, and some butter. And so most of those, you can make that happen in most of those type facilities. If you don't have access to that, and if you have enough foresight to do it, I mean, you can cook up steaks or hamburgers ahead of time, pack them up, and then if you have a way to cool them, just even a cooler. I mean, they taste, I cut up my steaks ahead of time when I do that, and they taste fine cold too. I mean, you can do that in a pinch, or you can go to the restaurants. I mean, like, the nice thing about the U.S. is there's a McDonald's in about every damn town in the U.S. I mean, the one thing I remember when I travel overseas, if I go by any sort of significant world landmark, I know I'm there because there's a McDonald's across the street from it. I mean, they're everywhere. And I'm not trying to promote McDonald's, but I mean, you can go to them or one of their competitors, and you can get 100% ground beef for very cheap, already cooked for you. And it's not grass fed in most cases. Although there are some fast food places. I know there's a place called Carl's Jr. I don't know if it's which regions it's in the U.S., but they offer a grass fed burger. And so you can do that stuff. And if you just say, I just want a patty, I've been doing this experiment with all these different places where I'm saying, so what does it cost? How does it taste? And so, you can find that stuff for very, you can get it pretty cheaply, if you don't buy the Coke and the French fries and take the bun off, and it's protein, it's fat, it's beef, and it's relatively inexpensive, much cheaper than you're going to get almost anything else in a restaurant.
So what will you do if you go into a McDonald's? Because I don't know if it's different in the US, but here you can't just buy the patties. So you'll just buy like 20 burgers.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you can't. I mean, if you go up to them and say, "Hey, will you sell me a single patty?" I mean, that's what I do. Or I'll call ahead, so I don't even have to drive there. I say, "Hey guys, do you guys sell single patties?" And if they say yes, I say, "How much is it?" And it was funny because I went to one Wendy's in California and I tried to do it, and they said, "No, we won't. We don't have a button for that." And so I said, "Okay." I pulled out a receipt from one I had from like a week ago. I said, "Hey, look, no, we don't do it here." So I went literally in my car, got in the GPS, looked for another Wendy's. I called them and said, "Hey, will you sell me a single patty?" I said, "Yeah." "How much is it?" They said it was like $1.49 a pound. I said, "Okay." So I went there and I said, "Hey, then I confirmed at the cash register, will you sell me a patty for a single patty?" They said, "Yeah." A lot of times they have to bring the manager in because they can't figure it out, and they get on the special screen, and they say that, and they say, "Oh, it's $1.49." And then I say, "Okay, give me 12 of them." And then they're like, "Oh." but I mean, once you get the price established, then it's just to go from there. And then I said, "Okay, add a side of bacon on that, throw a piece of cheese on there," and then that's how I do it.
And you see this huge man devouring mounds of meat. Are they just staring at you? Like,
well, yeah, I mean, a lot. I did this. I had this at this place called Smash Burger. Same thing. This kid was like, I just see this blank stare, and a manager kind of like 3 people come up to me. "Well, how do you want that?" And it's just like that's a telling thing, because the way I ordered that, they're like, no one ever does that, which tells you why. We've got all this sort of, it's such an anomaly that people come in and order just meat. Okay. And that's what tells me when we say meat eating is bad for us, it's because everybody eats their meat with a bun, with a French fry, with a shake and a soda. And so that stuff gets conflated to, that's what a meat eater is. And if you look at what a healthy meat eater does, like me, I eat meat and I don't eat the rest of the garbage. And as healthy as you can be, I think.
Yeah, I know. I love it. It's really. I mean, I'm not completely zero carb, as you know, but I have days where I am, or meals where I am, and I find it such a great like life hack, if you will, because it's so simple. And like if you're traveling, it's like, okay, if I want to eat well, then I just default to large portions of meat, you know. And the same thing as you were saying earlier, you know, I was in Audi. A day or two ago, which again is a supermarket local to here, and I just bought, you know, 4 ribeye packs, or two ribeye steaks per pack, and I shoved them in the freezer. And it's just bulk buying. It was very affordable. They weren't like premium, and it's just almost, yeah, it's just in a strange way sort of revolutionized my my eating in a way.
Well, I mean, and that's how I started as well. I mean, I did these, you know, where I'd go a few days, just zero carb, you know, just meat and eggs at that time, and you know, then I stretched it out to, you know, a week, and then I stretched it out to 10 days, and I stretched it out to 2 weeks, and then I kept stretching it out, and I honestly, I just felt good every time I did that, and so and I think that you know, once you start to realize that those other things aren't essential and aren't required, and there's a lot of people that disagree with this, but I just say, you know, you cannot deny people that are living like this and living healthy. And so if you say, if you're telling me I have to have broccoli or some sort of vegetable for me to be in optimal health, I would say that's not what I observe. And so that's how science should be done. You say, this is your observation, and if you can't account for that based on the current science, and then you have to go back and investigate that. And you know, and there's more and more people. I mean, you're watching on Twitter with me, all these people doing this, and you know, either they're lying and say, hey, I feel great, or maybe they actually do feel great, and maybe there is some validity to this stuff, and then maybe the 25,000 people now on Facebook that have a group that are all saying, hey, the vast majority of them saying, hey, I feel great, you know, maybe there's something to that. So I think that's something that is you know, worthy of at least acknowledgement, and then hopefully some testing.
You mentioned in the past when you tried new diets out, like the ketogenic diet, and I guess it's quite well understood that there's an adaptation period. There's a period of time where it's uncomfortable. You might get headaches or a drop in performance. You did that with zero carb. So you said, I think when you were interviewed before, you said that there was a period where you did see a drop in performance, I think over a month or something like that, or maybe longer. So how did you retain the patience to see it through if you was experiencing those things, or did you just acknowledge that they were temporary? Like, how did you manage that?
Right, Lauren. So, I mean, I think, you know, having done the keto adaptation before, you know, and then kind of stuck with that. And here's the reason that I continue to do that, is because I saw, you know, irrespective of my athletic performance, I saw a lot of health things that were going in the right directions. And so, you know, when I look at what it means to be healthy, I mean, I as an orthopedic guy, I look at joint function as a pretty good indicator. And so as I continue to see, you know, old pains that I had go away, you know, and I was just kind of comparing this to what was going on with my diet. And then, you know, despite the fact that I was a little weaker and had a little less energy, I just kind of kept staying with that. And then noticed that you know, once, and I looked at the literature enough to understand that there's this adaptation period. So I had already recognized that's going to happen. So I didn't worry about that. And it just, as I adapted, you know, it turned out that as I suspected it would, that I would do better. You know, that's one of the interesting about these, you know, the what we call the science of, you know, low carb athletics. And so you've got all these studies that are done out there, and they all tend to be 3 or 4 weeks long, maybe 6 weeks. And then they compare these groups, but they always start these people that are on standard diets, and they put them on a ketogenic diet. And so we know they're in a transition period for, you know, 3, maybe 4 of those weeks. And so you expect their performance to go down, and then they compare to people that aren't adapting to a new diet, and they say, well, look, their performance wasn't good. Well, I'm just like, of course, you know, what you need to do is take people that are already keto adapted, you know, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, and then test them against somebody who isn't. And that's a more realistic way to look at that. But you know, like I said, they don't account for the adaptation period, and I think it's longer than 3 to 4 weeks. At least when you're looking at athletic performance. I mean, I think when I went on a ketogenic diet, it took me, and I think Paul Burgess and I talked about this, and we had the same sort of experience. And it was months, maybe up to 6 months before we finally realized that. Now, when I went from a ketogenic diet to a zero carb diet, I think it was a shorter period of time, and I just think the zero carb diet is a little superior, maybe, and there's a lot of reasons I can point to why I think that is. Not, it remains to be proven, but I mean, your protein content's going up, on a meat diet versus a ketogenic diet. So, and I think most people would argue that protein is a pretty good performance supplement. So that's pretty well established. So you're eating more protein. We also know that meat is rich in creatine. Creatine has also been associated. One of the few supplements that's actually panned out. I'm talking about legal stuff, not steroids and stuff like that, the other guys' people. But we know meat is loaded with creatine. When you're eating 4 to 5 pounds of it, I'm getting a lot of creatine. And so that's probably impacting my performance. We also know carnosine and precursors for beta-alanine are found in meat. And we also know those tend to at least show a positive performance increase. So I'm eating this substance that's got all these performance supplements already built into it. And I'm taking 5 pounds of it a day. And so why does my performance go up? Well, and it's a high protein too. So why is my performance improving? I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think there's some things I'm not eating, which also go into that. But, if I wanted to say meat was a performance food, I think you could easily make that argument. And I think it has been done. I know if you look way back into history, with the Greek Olympians, way back, back when the Greeks were doing this, they noted that meat was what their athletes would eat to perform well. And I think we've known that for millennia, basically.
Okay. So I was going to ask you about creatine. What about your thoughts on branch chain amino acids? Do you think there's any place for BCAA supplementation, or do you think, again, it's redundant? Potentially.
Well, again, I think it's context dependent. I think, in my diet, no, I don't think so. I mean, I'm like I said, I'm eating 4 to 5 pounds of meat a day. I mean, it's got, animal protein, I think, and I think there's quite a few studies to support this, is superior to plant-based proteins for muscle building and for performance. I think it has all the amino acids already built in the ratios that we need them. And so, you can look at things like leucine and BCAAs, but, I think I think all the supplementation is diet context dependent. And so if your diet is poor on those things, if you're on a vegan diet, creatine is great because, you're going to get a boost from that. Me taking creatine would be a waste of time. I mean, it wouldn't do me any good. So I don't bother with that stuff.
What do you drink? Like during meals or just generally?
I drink water. It's boring.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, I said that, but I drink water. I drink probably, I don't know, I don't even count. I just drink when I'm thirsty. I will, like I said, occasionally as a social concession to my girlfriend who's from France and likes wine, I will have a half glass or a glass of wine. But that's basically, I don't drink milk. When I had, heavy cream a little bit, when I would, do a little bit of that, but I don't drink coffee, so. That's the other thing. A lot of people in zero carb will have coffee and they use it. And that's one thing I will say. I think, I think plants are overrated, but I think there are certain elements out of certain plants that can be helpful. Like caffeine clearly helps with sports performance. So I have some caffeine pills that I will occasionally take prior to exercising some days. But I just don't like the taste of coffee. I don't really like hot drinks, and so I never. Maybe if I lived in Ireland or Scotland where it was all cold and dreary quite a bit, then I would sort of take more of a shine to that stuff. But it's usually hot here, so I want something cold, and I'll drink a glass of water typically.
I don't want to belabor this point too much, but are you familiar with decision fatigue or the concept of decision fatigue?
Decision fatigue. I would say. I probably am, but I don't know if I'm using the terminology right. Go ahead and tell me what your.
Well, it's just the concept that whenever you're making decisions during the day, you're depleting your decision-making willpower, which can lead to you making bad decisions or slipping up in some way during the day. So maybe you make a bunch of decisions that could be avoided, and as a result you
Right.
end up stressed out and eating junk food or making poor decisions later on that day or something like that.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess
Or
you
making
can.
none
I
at
mean,
all.
I'm I'm misremembering this correct, but I think like Albert Einstein would just wear the same shirt and tie every day. You'd
Right.
have to think that may be the same. And I've met people like that where they just do that. And yeah, for me, I don't have to make a lot of decisions when it comes to diet. I mean, I drink water, eat meat. So I mean, yeah, I mean, if you have to painstakingly think about every little detail, then I think that can become tiring and draining on you. Sure. So I don't disagree with the premise of that. Um, yeah, sure. So that's my. I think it's reasonable. To a point.
That's spot on, and you're right. It's I think Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs. They're famous for wearing. Obviously, they're famous for many things, but they're famous for wearing the same outfits every day. And it's all about automating trivial decisions that may take away from your creativity or times when you need to make very important decisions. And I feel like your attitude towards diet really sinks in nicely with that, because you're just not having to make any, you're not having to like think each time you're going to have lunch. Oh, what should I have today? Should I have this spice and this herb? And so that's quite a nice little, I think, upside to this diet. Obviously there's the health benefits that we're talking about, but
Well, I think that certainly there are people who argue, well, it's boring, and I like to have those different experiences. And I'm 50 years old. I've eaten every taste I can possibly imagine. I don't care if they come up with a Oreo, granola bar, Snickers bar hybrid anymore. I don't care to taste that. I mean, I've tasted all that garbage, and so I think that it's very simple, but the one thing that people that haven't done this, they have a hard time wrapping their head around, is the fact that once you start doing it, it all tastes really, really good. I mean, every time I eat a ribeye steak, I'm happy. I'm not like, oh, I got to eat another ribeye. I'm like, awesome, I could eat another ribeye steak or even a hamburger from In-N-Out. I mean, those In-N-Out hamburgers, if you ever get it to the western part of the United States, you got to have those. Those are really, really good. But so I'm not depressed that I have to eat good food every day, and that I don't get to eat some, artificially flavored blue-green colored, snack that some scientist has invented. I mean, that is something that doesn't bother me at all. The health benefits, I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's very noticeable to me, and so that also encouraged me to do that. But I mean, honestly, yeah, I don't have to make a lot of decisions about food, and yes, it's pretty straightforward, but if you look at any other animal on the planet, they aren't looking at a menu and scratching their head. I mean, they're like food, eat, done, and it's like breathing. I don't think about the nitrogen content of the air I'm breathing. I don't think about, the color of my urine or how many times I urinate a day. I mean, it's just human natural processes. And I think eating is one of those. It is, at least in every other species on the planet. And so just because we've as humans have developed enough capacity to confuse things, I think we unnecessarily do so.
This is kind of carrying on from the decision fatigue sort of thing, but it's, I'm just interested, when you walk into, so I walk into a shop, even if I am just buying meat, yes, it's simplified because, if I'm looking at less things in the store, then by definition, my buying decisions are less, cumbersome, but like, I still do sometimes get overwhelmed and a bit bewildered. So like, let's say I'm looking at bacon, there's so many options, unsmoked, smoked, different brands, which have different amounts of, trace stuff in there, which might not be good for me. So how do you, I mean, look, I know, I feel like you're just going to say, I just buy ribeyes and that's it. Like, but like, I know you do buy bacon occasionally and stuff like that. So how do you, there must be like, just for you, like a binary where you make these decisions. Like I pick bacon that looks like this, or that has this, or I avoid this. Like, how do you make your decisions, I guess, when you're shopping in the grocery store for stuff like that?
Yeah, like you said, the easy answer is just say I just buy ribeyes. But I mean, yeah, I do eat a little bacon. I mean, it was kind of funny because when I went into one of the paleo diet and then all the other keto diets, I really looked forward to bacon. I really liked it. Man, I tell you, my desire to eat bacon, and this may dissuade people from doing this, but my desire to eat bacon really has gone down. Except as maybe as an accompaniment on a hamburger or something like that. So, I mean, I don't really stress over it too much. I look at the prices. If something is not ridiculously expensive and maybe if it says uncured or, antibiotic free, I might do that just because, there's some social conditioning that causes me to do that. But I think really it's probably not that important. I think, here's what I look at it. I think meat is basically food. And so once you've got that sort of mindset there, any meat you can get is probably better than anything else in the store. So, people worry about the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio on a conventional meat, but then they might be eat stuff that's full of soybean oil, and you're like, well, what are you talking about? I mean, it's like, it's just you have to figure out what relatively is good and what relatively is not, and see how you respond to that. Now, there are probably plenty of people out there that can go on an all meat diet and then add some fruit in, and do just great, and that's great for those people, and there's other people that that can do more vegetables and stuff like that. I'd say most people can't do a bunch of sugar and processed food, at least long term, and thrive. Although there's people that they do in their 20s, and there's some athletes that do that. But I think you look at most of these retired athletes that come out, and a lot of them are in pretty sad shape if they don't change their eating pattern. Now, a lot of them, they have enough money where they can get nutritional counseling and they can do okay. But the ones that don't, I mean, they end up, with some health problems, joint pain, joint problems. If you look at, I know you had, I'll leave that for now. Never mind.
You can go on if you like, or would you?
No, I was just gonna, I was gonna comment. I know, and I don't know. This is just pure speculation, but I know you had Clarence Bass on, and Clarence Bass, just the rip guy, this phenomenal shape guy. He's now, I guess, pushing 80 or something like that, but he was, just a really lean guy, and wrote Ripped and a bunch of other books. I actually had one of his books that I had bought about 4 or 5 years ago, and I really respect the guy. But he's had both of his hips replaced, and he eats this relatively high carb diet, high fiber, and works out really well, and it maintains his muscle mass. And my question is, well, maybe that diet infected your hips. You can look at Ronnie Coleman. He was Ronnie Coleman was Mr. Olympia, huge bodybuilder. I think he won it 5 or 6 times. Both hips had to be replaced. And again, is it the heavy squatting, or is it the diet that you're eating that's doing that? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's something that, we should, because I squat heavy and my hips are fine, So, I mean, there's other people that do. And so I think it's something that you have to look into.
Now, that's really interesting. And could you do me a favor and just describe your theory as to why you think that, a high carb diet, could be causing those issues? I mean, you've talked about how that can affect the muscle tissue, but I just really like to understand from a mechanistic point of view, how you think that might work.
Right. So, and I don't think it's just carbohydrates and it's just sugar. I think, I think there's a guy on Twitter, I'll throw out his name, Tucker Goodrich, who's got some pretty good evidence that some of the high levels of omega-6 oils also probably impact this. And so I think it basically, these things, and I wrote an article about this, likening, these advanced glycation end products and some of these other probably bad actors chemically almost cause like a rusting effect. If you look at an automobile, look at rusting out, you've got damage to these tissues. These things bind up to proteins and they cause these things not to function as well. They cause the integrity and the strength of those tissues to deteriorate. And I think that given over a period of time, whatever the combination is, whether it's a mixed metalloproteinases, there's different things that are thought to cause this, but they're all biologic. And I think once those things, take effect, and then you put any sort of mechanical stresses on top of that, say you've now gained 30 pounds, and so now you've got more stress across the knee, but you've already got this environment that's causing this tissue to weaken, then I think, that leads to at least joint destruction. And you can use that for the same thing for really any tissue in the body. And that really gets to the heart of aging. What is going on with aging is a discontinued accumulation of sort of tissue that doesn't function appropriately. And, there's a lot of thought on mitochondrial dysfunction and how different processes affect that. And I think it's, at least there's evidence to support that, high oxidative stress via, carbohydrate metabolism is probably more likely to do so than maybe fat metabolism. And so again, there may be a benefit long term from either tissue damage or just general aging and health to sort of minimizing that. And that's what I'm finding, at least, at the very end point, because it's all ultimately, this stuff is all a black box. We know parts of it, and we learn, and every year we learn another 50 steps that go with this thing, and whatever we thought was true, we find out, well, maybe that's not quite true, or the factors that we thought influence things are more complicated than we think about. It's like with mTOR, people saw, well, we know that protein stimulates this mTOR pathway, and that may impact on aging. And now there's some other things that come to light that show that maybe that's not the whole story. And I just look at the clinical endpoint. I look at how do people age, and what things are they doing when they're healthier. And it's clear that people that are exercising, strength training, and eating more protein are aging better. And I don't care what the biochemistry says. You can't deny what the observations are. And just because you can't explain it with your current understanding of biochemistry doesn't mean that, that it's wrong.
I know that there's it's kind of said quite often in, I guess, the kind of muscle building communities that, they often claim that eating carbohydrates is important because it has a protein sparing effect, if you're after more muscle hypertrophy. And I think a lot of people perhaps listening to this might be a bit fearful. Oh God, if I reduce my carbohydrate intake or eliminate it in this case, although you do have, obviously gluconeogenesis and all of that, it will affect my gains. So what would you say to people that might have that fear?
Yeah, so I think that's a justifiable fear based upon what we know currently. I think that the impact that carbohydrates have on insulin is significant, and I think that has a positive role on anabolism. And we know that there's bodybuilders that shoot up insulin for that effect, and so carbohydrates are very potent in doing that. Protein, also is, but it's probably less potent. I think that the most effective way to build muscle is to take steroids, probably eat some carbohydrates, and take some other drugs, and eat enough protein. Now, that has negative consequences, I would argue. And I think that, we can argue the pros and cons of taking exogenous testosterone and steroids and growth hormone and insulin, and whether that's good or not for us. And I don't think I want to get into that now. I mean, I think on a net point is probably not the best thing for us. But then you can also say maybe carbohydrates also have a net negative, when we're looking at long term. So if I'm a 50-year-old guy like I am, and I'm thinking, how do I want to maintain my muscle mass and get stronger, for the long term? And I have, at least from my experience, without carbohydrates, I've been able to add strength. I'll honestly say I haven't put on a lot of size, just because I'm not really trying to do that. I'm really trying to work on my strength to weight ratio right now, which is supporting rowing. And I think that is a better way for me to do that, because if I eat a bunch of carbohydrates, I'm going to have some kind of joint problems and joint pain, and maybe more prone to injuries. At least that's my, what I think.
Potential trade-off there.
Yeah, I think there's a trade-off. Like I said, I don't deny that carbohydrates are effective for building muscle. There's no doubt about that. Can you do it without it? I would say the guys over at Keto Gains are showing that you can do that. I would argue that, at least from a performance perspective, I'm doing that. And I think, again, it's you have to worry about, what's the cost benefit ratio of doing those things. And, you just have to experiment yourself and see what works.
Yeah, good stuff. I forgot what I was going to ask you now. There's another question, but it's gone, so I'm going to move on to this next one I have here. So you talked about before how you eat ground beef occasionally. Now, this might be a really stupid question, but we don't call it ground beef here. We call it like mince. Is that the same thing? Is that correct?
I believe it is. Yeah, I believe. Yeah. When I lived in New Zealand, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think it was mince, the same thing as ground beef.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just cut up beef, chopped up, ground, minced up.
There you go. Because I saw something there. I thought, well, that's really, really affordable, and something I'm probably going to eat more of, I suppose, because it's just cheaper, and it provides the same benefit. Okay, so we talked about deficiencies and things like that. Okay, so we'll listen to a chap called Mike Williams. We talked a little bit more about like the social challenges that you mentioned before. What do your peers think about your diet?
Well, I mean, I don't really know. Here's the reason why. Because I'm 6'5", 240 pounds, and people are kind of like, they don't want to offend me. So they think I'm crazy, going to hurt them or something like that. But, so I mean, they smile, they nod, and they say it's interesting. And, I get this, oh, that's pretty cool. And I try to, I don't try to push it on anybody, in real life, although I'm a pretty good advocate for it. And I think it's something that is available for people to try. And certainly when I talk to, certain patients and stuff like that, I'll let them know that what options are there and ways, dietary strategies. But, they think I'm a kind of a sort of a freak anyway, just because of what I do athletically and that sort of stuff. So I think I get sort of the pleasant smiles and no real negative stuff about it.
I mean, do you go out for dinner with friends very often? And when you do, like, do you just get the big ribeye? Is that and then just leave the sides?
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, if I go out to dinner, and I don't do it that often, just because I quite honestly, I feel like I can cook better and eat better at home, and so I've really kind of in the last sort of year or two sort of gone away from going out to eat too much. But when I do, it's yeah. I mean, I'll order either, depending where I go. Yeah, it's usually a big steak, and I went. Well, I had a dinner meeting with another carnivore. He's helping with this N equals many experiment. We met together. We had steaks, and a waitress came up to us and said, "Would you like some bread?" No. They eat that? No. We just want meat. They look at it, but it's not that. It was a steakhouse, so it wasn't that bad of a deal.
Yeah. No, because I think the reason I bring this up is because, and I experience this sometimes. I think a lot of people they feel pressured by the environment and socially, so they feel like if they're not participating in eating, if it's like a birthday or some social event, they're eating some sugar or some bread or at least trying other things, like they're going to feel the peer pressure and then buckle. And I wondered, is it, obviously you're a bit older than me. Is it just a wisdom thing? Like, where you just get to a point where you're like, what, I just don't care what people think. What advice do you have, I suppose, for people that are in that sort of position?
Yeah. I mean, I think in general in life, the less you care about what other people think, probably the better off you're going to be, I mean, just for a lot of different things. But I mean, yeah, well, if I go to a birthday party, I just don't eat that stuff. I mean, I just know going in, I mean, I will actively stuff myself before I go, so I'm not even tempted. Like I'm going to go to some, and I'll try to do it with my kids too, because I know my kids got to go to birthday parties, and I will load those kids up with as much good food as I can shove into them, and then say, okay. And then they get there, and they might have, they might take a little tiny piece of cake or
that's a good strategy,
something like that. And so you try to mitigate that damage. But yeah, I don't really have any personally. I don't have big issues with social stuff, but I do think and I made this kind of comical tweet about the main deficiency with an all meat diet is a deficiency of caring what other people think, and I think it's true. You get to that and you're eating like nobody else or very few people, and all of a sudden your attitude towards a lot of things becomes, hey, I don't care what you think. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to, because it's benefiting me, and I think you should. I think that should carry over to a lot of aspects of life.
Cool. Careful fidgeting, because your laptop or computer mic is picking up. So when you're sweeping the desk and touching things, it's picking up the sounds. That's all right. I wouldn't have said that to you in person, but no. Okay, so no, that's good advice, and I just thought it's quite funny, listening to what you were saying. I was like, oh, Ted Naiman does the complete opposite. He'll like, and I'm guilty of this. He'll strategically fast or train before he goes to something, and then he'll just devour the crap. Yeah,
I mean, certainly, like I said, I mean, I like Ted a lot. I think he's a good guy. I mean, I've never met him, but I mean, we get along pretty well. I think with very similar philosophies. And if my goal wasn't to be constantly breaking world records and performing, as good as I could do, then yeah, I would probably make more concessions like that. Maybe, depending on how bad I felt. I've had some, it's kind of interesting. I find people that they find that once they do this for a long time, they find that even small indulgences leave them wrecked for a couple of days, and then for some people it's not worth it. It's like when people that drink a lot or stop drinking, and then they find out that maybe those hangovers aren't that fun anymore, and that those 6 or 7 beers at the pub weren't worth the feeling crappy for 2 days the next day. And so you just kind of, again, I think part of that comes with age. I mean, at 50, I'm like, I don't really care if I eat a piece of cake. And so it's not a big deal anymore.
No, it's really interesting hearing you say that, because I feel I'm going in that direction, because my girlfriend and I, we don't drink anywhere near as much as we used to, nor do we eat anywhere near as much junk food. We'll indulge sometimes, but just the other day, I had 2 or 3 pints of Guinness, and I felt absolutely crap the next day, and I had very little motivation, and I really had to force myself to get work done and that type of thing. And it each time you do it, you're like, why do I do this again? It's weird.
Well, I mean, alcohol is an intoxicant. You have one or two, and then you kind of find you're laughing and you're having a good time. You think, oh, this is neat, and then you realize a couple of days later. But I look at when you look at what experiences you can have in life, and so again, age plays a lot to do with this. But if I want to go to Machu Picchu and run up and down the ruins, I want to be able to do that at 60 rather than take the wheelchair up, so I think again, your mortality becomes more important the older you get, and then whatever life you have left, you want to make sure you can really enjoy it and really do the things you want to do. And eating a cupcake is not on my top 10 things list of things I want to do the rest of my life. There are a lot of other experiences I'd rather have, and I'd like to have the health to be able to do those things. And so if it means I can't eat whatever little cupcake or something else somebody else is eating, then that's fine too.
Have you noticed any improvement in your cognitive ability? Anecdotally, just are you sharper doing this, do you think? Or
because that's some people would argue the opposite's true, depending on who you listen to on Twitter. But it's really hard to quantify. I mean, some days I think I'm pretty lucid. And I think pretty smart. I know what I'm talking about, but other times you're like, I don't feel like thinking too hard. But that's an interesting thing, because we've got this. This is another experiment we you could do. There are cognitive tests that are out there that you can actually administer and do, and you could get again, social media, you get 1,000 people and say, let's do this cognitive test before and then after drinking bulletproof coffee, and say, because there's all these supplement manufacturers make all these wild claims, and it's and then they'll point to this study of 8 people or some rat study, and whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it sure sells a lot. And so, these are things we could test. And so I don't know. I mean, I think more sort of being more serious about this, I think there's, especially when we come to look at dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And I think, does ketosis help that? Does exogenous ketones help that? Does, whatever, does it improve cognitive ability? And there's things like mini mental status examination.
It's that Zero-Carb diet, Sean. It's
right. So I mean, there's all sorts of cognitive studies you could run, and so you could easily get those research tools into people's hands, and they could all get together and they could say, okay, let's do it. Let's have 1,000. Let's have 10,000 of us run this on our mother who has early stage dementia and see how it works. And so you could quickly get that information. But yeah, I can't say personally, I can say that my cognition is clearly better. I mean, I have more energy. I'm not tired as much, and so that probably contributes to that. But I have not formally tested that, so I can't say, for sure.
But when you're performing surgery, let's say, do you feel any difference at all, or is it hard to say?
Not really. I can't say. You get to a point where you do it so often and so many times that it becomes a very routine thing.
Oh, okay.
I would say my concentration is fine. I mean, I've got no issues with it. So it's certainly not detrimental if I can at least make that claim.
So I've been, I had a guest on the podcast recently, who is into biohacking and has a business in that. And, this guy is like at the other end of the spectrum when it comes to being like really obsessed with any sort of tech or hack there might be to improve health in some way. I know there's a lot of people that are really skeptical about the whole sort of biohacking movement, but really keen to just hear your thoughts. So, what about, with the, I guess, the fears a lot of people have around electromagnetic fields and the damage that can cause to the body. Do you agree with this stuff? Do you take it seriously? Are there any measures or interventions that you personally take to reduce your exposure to things like EMFs, stuff like that?
Well, like I said, I haven't really taken a bunch of measures, electromagnetic forces and stuff like that. I try to avoid, I found that I'm using less chemicals on my body, like the hand sanitizers, less of the, shampoos and creams and stuff like that. I try to, just use water more often. I'm not sort of paranoid about it, because I can't, I can't run from all of it. I think, if I were, I've got a TV in my house, TVs in my house, I've got laptops, we've got a lot of things, microwaves, all these things that generate some of this stuff. And if I isolated myself in a cave or something like that, I might be able to do that. And so I don't know, again, whether it's a radio tower down the street or, the Wi-Fi signal in my neighbor's house. I mean, there's things that there's things I can change. There's things I can't realistically change. I can change my diet. I can change how I sleep. I can change, how I train. I can't change how much pollution's outside. I mean, I can move, I guess. But there's like I said, there's certain things that is probably within your capability of changing. And then you can worry about those things. But there's other things that, man, it's tough. I don't know. What does the guy do when he goes to work? Does he does he run for everybody that comes up to him with a cell phone? There's a point to that where it's just not realistic. And I think that's how I look at it. I think it's good in general to be concerned about your health and be concerned about how the environment impacts your health. But again, there's a point where it becomes paralyzing, and there's a point where you start to overanalyze stuff, and then all of a sudden you're a mess. You're arguably worse than you were when you started.
Good. That's a good explanation. So, does that mean that you won't, for instance, if I were to go into your house, you just have a standard wireless router for your internet and you just have standard lighting? Or do you actually think, what, I'm not going to have standard lights. I'm going to have, infrared, and my router's going to have a little special device on it where it doesn't, emit as much damaging EMF or something like that? Or do you not care about any of that stuff?
Yeah, I don't, like I said, that's not something that and maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but I don't really have much concern about it. I'll try to turn the lights down low at night when it's getting close to bedtime. I think there's some benefit to that. If you just look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, obviously it got dark, and it wasn't until we invented fire, which was arguably, when we harnessed that between 1.8 million and a 250,000 years ago. It's debatable when that actually happened, when we had indoor, lighting and stuff like that and cooking. But I think that, it makes sense to, kind of, at least to some degree, you follow the circadian rhythms that were been there since the dawn of time. And so wake up when the sun comes up and sort of wind down for sleep when it goes down, and try to minimize that extra artificial lighting just by turning it off. It's not like I'm, I don't know, it's not like I'm when somebody turns the light switch on in the house, I'm running like a cockroach trying to avoid, light getting on me. And so, I just, again, the same thing. Even if you have that in your house, assuming you go out into public, if you become a hermit and you never go anywhere, you're going to be exposed to that stuff. And so is it realistically reasonable for you to avoid it all the time? It's probably not.
No, interesting answer. Cool. Okay, so these are a separate section of kind of like rapid fire questions. Again, your answers aren't rapid fire, just the questions. What does do you have any morning routines? Like, what does the first kind of 90 minutes of your day look like?
Right. So basically, hopefully I'll wake up, generally I wake up before, well, when the sun comes up, or sometimes a little earlier. The first thing, I'll do
How early
is
is that?
about 5:30 or 6, typically, something like that. And then I'll get up, I'll take a cold shower. That wakes me up because that's how I wake up. And then what I'll do is I've got a couple of dogs I have to take for a walk. So I'll get up. I'll usually, if I'm gonna have breakfast, I'll throw a steak in the oven, kind of get, whether it's, so I'll have the steak going in the oven right away. I'll feed the dogs, take them for a walk, 20-minute walk, come back, then I'll eat my steak, and then I'll kind of get ready for the rest of the day. So that's kind of how my days typically start.
Do you have a pet obsession that you do on the evenings or weekends that you've not talked about on Twitter or on podcasts?
A pet obsession, man. I tell you, I'm probably to the chagrin of most of my family. I'm pretty obsessed with athletics and breaking records, and so I try to do that most days or every day if I can. I do some kind of training, but I hopefully on the weekends, we have a little more time. We can do something fun. Go out to the beach. I live a 5-minute walk from the beach, which is really
lovely.
Really nice to have. So we took our little boy for his first surfing lesson yesterday, which was pretty cool. He was actually up standing on the surfboard at age 4.
That's amazing.
On day 1, which is pretty cool. Better than I would ever do. I'd fall over, I'm sure. I'm too heavy.
What have you changed your mind about in health, fitness, and nutrition in the last year? So not excluding like maybe the zero carb thing. Like, so maybe if you say in the last 6 months, that would be maybe something you would come out of that sort of question.
So something in the last 6 months. Well, I mean, obviously my diet has changed dramatically over the last couple of years, but I can't say I've changed my training exercise philosophy too much. I guess I would say I'm more open to weirdness than I used to be. When I was, if you would have interviewed me 5 years ago about any of this stuff, I would have said anybody who does this stuff is crazy and stupid and doesn't know, they're just silly. But now, I mean, the more I sort of step outside the traditional medical doctor box, the more things I see that are at least worthy of consideration and testing, and I don't just dismiss that stuff. And so, like the stuff with maybe all these shampoos and stuff, chemical laden stuff we smear all over our body, creams and stuff like that. Maybe there's some problems with that. Maybe the thought with those are endocrine disruptors, or whatever people want to say about those. Maybe there's something to that, and it might be worth saying, hey, let's hold off on that stuff for a while. Maybe we're not supposed to have pour some bottle with 52 chemicals all over our body and slather ourselves with that every day. Maybe not. So I mean, I think that would be just a general capacity to accept things that are less mainstream than I used to be. And I think the diet certainly contributes to that. Very
much so. Talking about shower gels and things like that, I use I think they're the Dr. Bronner soaps. So they're all like organic, natural ingredients from what I can see, and none of the very long words that I can't pronounce, which you see in a lot of the products sold these days. And the same kind of philosophy of toothpaste. I use a brand called Jason or Kingfisher. So I do try and follow those principles in that stuff as well. What soap do you use?
What soap do I? I don't know if I use mostly it's water, and I'll use a conditioner on my hair, and you just put that on my body. I mean, like I said, I don't, I spend there in a cold shower, and I just wipe myself with the water pretty well, and I don't use, quite honestly, I don't use it that much. I take 2 or 3 showers a day, so I mean, I don't, maybe it's just the water that keeps me clean, because I don't, at least no one tells me I smell bad or anything like that.
So you don't.
So, but
sorry, go on.
No, I mean, so that's more or less what I do. Again, I don't have I mean, honestly, I haven't sort of spent a lot of time thinking about this, as far as, poring over which is the best brand to use, or whether to use it at all. And so I just kind of doing that now. And I think it's good to be hygienic and it's good to be clean. I don't know that you need to spread chemicals on your body to do that. So, yeah, so I don't, I occasionally sometimes will put something on, but generally not that often.
All right. So sometimes you have a really hard workout. I know this is a really strange question, but you have a hard workout and you're sweating a lot. You might literally just have a cold shower without any shower gel or soap. And that's what you might do sometimes, is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's sometimes what I do. I mean, like I said, a lot of times it feels really good. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know if this is kind of a sort of a non sequitur, but I mean, well, we can transition this, but, the whole thought about cold immersion and does it inhibit muscle growth? Does it inhibit inflammation? Are there benefits to it relative to athletic performance? And, there's been, I think, about 3 studies now that have shown that people that are taking ice baths directly after training sort of indicate maybe a net negative impact on muscle synthesis. And so the timing of that is questionable. If you wait 15 minutes to take your shower, is that sufficient? Is a shower different from an ice bath? And so those are the questions that aren't really answered. I've taken ice baths frequently, and I usually don't do those right after a workout. I usually do that as its own sort of event. And so I think there are some benefits to doing that. There's a whole bunch of people that follow, a guy named Wim Hof. I don't know if you know who Wim Hof is.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Iceman. So anybody, certainly he would argue that there's some benefits to that. And I think there probably is, or there probably are. And, but again, the only research out there showing that if you're doing it directly after working out might be negative. I tend not to do that. That may be perfectly acceptable, but right now I'm not doing it right after a workout. But I am taking a cold shower after a workout.
If you could go back and give your 20-year-old self some advice, what would you tell that young man? And if you could give us some context, so where you were in your life at that point.
Wow. So 20, I was eating a lot of stuff I probably shouldn't have eaten, junk wise. I used to, my philosophy up until probably I was in my early 40s was, life's too short, eat dessert first. And so, I would, every meal would, well, not everyone, but most meals I would eat a dessert. And, I felt that, it doesn't matter what I eat as long as I worked out hard. And that worked for me for about 40 years and then until it didn't. And then I started to seeing the negative effects of health. So, probably had I paid more attention to diet earlier on in life, I probably would have avoided some of the health issues that I had. And arguably, I'm pretty lucky I'm not that sick, but I mean, I was certainly, by the time I was 45, becoming I was probably pre-diabetic. I had some skin related changes that are consistent with insulin resistance. Probably I lost some of my hair. I've got most of it, but I've lost some of my hair. I have, I started to develop blood pressure issues, and those things I probably could have avoided had I paid more attention to my diet back then. So, and then I think the other thing we touched on as far as being too concerned about what other people think, I think that is something that plagues us all. We're always sort of, comparing ourselves to other people, seeing what they do, and I think the earlier you find out that no one really cares about you anyway. So just do your own damn thing and live your life, like you want to.
That's good advice. What are you really not very good at, apart from surfing?
Lots of things. I am horrible at anything musical. I mean, I like music. I like to listen to it. But my kids will actively tell me, Dad, don't sing. They just say, we don't like you. My 4-year-old, he'll say, you don't sing very well, Dad.
Can you sing us a tune now? Or?
What's that?
Can you sing?
No, not very well. I don't want to lose you listeners, Lawrence. You'll lose your listeners if I sing. So.
This is true. This is very true. Okay, there's some of these that we've already really answered, to be honest. Okay, what change in your life or behavioral modification are you most proud of in the last year or recent memory, and which habits are you trying to change now?
Oh, goodness. What habits am I trying to change now? Well, I'm trying to sort of reconcile being obsessed with, performance and trying to make that work with other people in my life. It's definitely, I think anybody that achieves anything significant like world records and stuff from a sports standpoint, they have to kind of be obsessed about it. And I think that impacts, the people around you. And so I'm trying to be more mindful of that and try to figure out how to make both things work and not, and try to switch off of that stuff more often, it's not unusual for me to sort of ruminate on, performance and what I need to do and think of, and almost overthink that stuff to the exclusion of spending quality time with other people. And so I'm trying to, try to balance that more. I'm trying to, I'm, like I said, I think we mentioned last time, we're going to be writing a book here in the process of that. So that's a new sort of venture for me. So that's something that's, I'm trying to figure out how to be more effective and more efficient at that. So those are a couple things that are going on right now.
Just listening to you there, were you sort of alluding to, like, even when you're not doing the training, that you're constantly talking about it and thinking about it with some of your family, and they're just kind of like, look, Dad, or they're like, look, Sean, I just don't care.
I mean, honestly, family, it's not something that's real important to them. And it's not something that's real important to many people when you talk about training or rowing. The only people that really care are people that actually do it, that are your peers in that particular activity. And so, I'll get some of that. I'll go back and forth with people that I know either online about different training strategies and stuff like that. But I mean, it's not that I'm actively talking to them, but I'm just distracted. I'm thinking about I should have done something a little bit different in training today because I know it cost me a few tenths of a second in performance. And, you just kind of, you mentally replay these things over and over again and thinking on how, the next time you're going to adjust that so that you're better the next time you do it. So, or you're thinking, where is your deficiency? Like right now, I'm always analyzing what I need to do to go faster. Right now, I think leg strength is what's holding me back a little bit. So now I'm sort of rotating more, more squatting into my workouts and stuff. And so where I was kind of, leaving those out a little bit more in favor of other things. And so, just those things that go over and over where you're, how do you get better and what is it going to take?
What books have you reread the most yourself?
Well, I mean, in honesty, reread it would be medical textbooks because I have to go back and refer to those. If I see something I haven't seen in several years, and so that's pretty boring. Unfortunately, I don't go back and reread a lot of books. I mean, I've read a lot of books, but it's rare that I go back and reread one. I just never have had a great need to do that. I guess I pretty much. And it's probably faulty, but I kind of get, I know what that book generally has to say. And if I ever need to pull a direct quote, then I know I need to go back and do that. But as far as sort of trying to relearn a concept from a book, I haven't gone back and done that much. And like I said, with the exception of, surgical textbooks and things like that, where you really have to, the details really matter.
Okay. Better question then might be, what are your, I suppose when it comes to health, fitness, and nutrition, what books do you generally recommend to people, if any?
Well, I mean, and I said this, this is something I said online maybe a month ago. Gary Taubes wrote that book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, and I read that somewhere several years ago, and it was very enlightening and very well thought out, and it's controversial. There's a lot of people that disagree with that, but I think what it did, at least for me, is it caused me to question, the accepted dogma, and I think that in itself is very powerful. And Nina Teicholz has done a similar book, and there's been some other people that have written some books out there that all sort of build on this. Jeff Volek and Steve Finney have written a pretty nice book. But I think Gary's book, for me, was sort of a seminal sort of moment or a seminal event that changed the way I thought about, diet at first. And it's kind of progressed into thinking about health in general and in medicine in general. And I think he, and I said, I think he needs to be, knighted. Again, in the U.S., you don't knight people, but he needs to be recognized for it. I think he has to some degree. And again, he has a lot of detractors, a lot of people that vehemently disagree with. But I think the fact that he has stimulated that conversation is remarkable and profound, and I think people should recognize that. And so even if the book itself, and I think it's a well-written book, but even if the book itself you disagree with, or you think there's other books that are better for explaining what he's trying to explain, I think that to me was, at least where I'm at now, that was probably the book that did that.
Oh, good stuff. I'm pretty much out of questions, but I just wondered, what other area? Is there anything else you wanted to explore that we haven't talked about? Is there anything that's really sort of at the back of your mind? You're like, I really want to just talk about X.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, well, hopefully you'll be willing to talk about this stuff. And so, we talk about, there's a lot of people out there that talk about, testosterone supplementation and that. And, I'd like to say that I don't take testosterone. I don't take steroid hormones. My whole athletic career, I've been pretty opposed to that. And I've competed in sports, whether it be rugby or strongman or powerlifting or throwing, that drugs have been a part of all those sports. I've always been opposed to that. And so I'm pretty biased about that. I think I have a bit of an ethical bias against that, and whether the health arguments I think are not as clear about that. But I think one of the things we see is there's so many men out there, they get in their 30s, even their 20s, and 30s and 40s and 50s and beyond, where they do have low testosterone. Their symptoms are such that they have clinical evidence of that going on. And we know the population, the overall testosterone levels of male population has declined, something like 20% over the last, several decades. And so there is definitely something going on. The problem is that I think most people, and it's like any other medical issue out there, we think that we can just put a drug at it, in this case testosterone replacement, and fix all the issues that cause that. And I think those things are being caused by diet, lifestyle, lack of exercise, lack of sleep, stress. We can talk about the chemicals we're exposed to. Maybe EMF has an effect on it, I don't know. But I think that, if you blindly just go on and say, I'm going to take testosterone replacement and think all those other issues are going to go away, I think you're really harming yourself. Additionally, we have, like every other hormone we have, whether it be insulin, testosterone, glucagon, estrogen, whatever we have, it's all designed to work in a certain fashion, in a certain amount, in a pulsatile fashion, and it's supposed to respond to certain environmental things. If there is a need for me to be really aggressive, if I'm in a situation, I'm probably going to secrete a little more testosterone during that event. If I'm on exogenous testosterone, I'm taking, whether it's a cream or an injection once a week, those things become, I think, dysregulated. And so now you've taken this normal response and made it something abnormal. And so I think there's harm, there potentially is harm in that. And so I think for most people, if you can get your diet straightened out, do all those other things, it may take a year or two to do that. That is far better to me, to preserve what you have naturally, than to at 25 years old say, hey, I'm just going to take testosterone, because then you're going to be stuck on it for the rest of your life likely. And you're going to have to probably do increasingly greater and greater doses over time, most likely, to get the same effect. And so I think if you can just, train right, exercise, eat right, sleep right, you'll preserve your function a lot longer than you think you could. I don't think at 50 I should have low testosterone. I think that is not from aging. I think that's from lifestyle, and I don't think I do. I think clinically, I don't test mine, but I even if mine came back at whatever number you say 320, which would be on the relatively low side, the display and the function of it is fine. I wake up every day with an erection. I lift weights. I'm getting strong. I'm one of the strongest 50-year-olds you'll find. I'm breaking records on a rowing machine. Everything else that normally would be attributed to testosterone function is functioning very fine in me without that. And so I think anybody else, most people can do that as well if they're willing to put the time and the effort, and not just go the easy route and say, here, take a drug. And hopefully there's not that many people that just say, here. There are doctors that'll just, here's your prescription, here's your test, here's your prescription. We know that happens with everything else, and testosterone is no different. But I think, long term, that is not the solution.
So is that a sign of good testosterone if you do wake up with an erection?
Yeah, sure it is. I mean,
Really?
yeah, of course it is. I mean, and so I mean that's something that and it's funny. It's something that people on zero carb will note that even older guys, 50s and 60s, will start saying that all of a sudden you're having these spontaneous erections that you weren't having in your 40s and stuff. And so that's something that maybe this is TMI or stuff that people want to talk about. But when you're like a 15-year-old kid or 14-year-old kid, and you're sitting in the class and you've got this erection, you're embarrassed by it because you can't walk around. You're going to cover up. That happens when you're a teenager, and then it kind of goes away. But I will tell you now, as a 50-year-old on a zero carb diet, I'm having those things happening, and so it's kind of like it's like, wow, this is kind of cool, but it's also somewhat awkward sometimes. And so yeah, I do think that is not that I think, I know it's a manifestation of functioning testosterone.
I realize how immature I am. I can't stop giggling when we're talking about this stuff. But no, it's really interesting because I've experienced exactly the same things, which is I suppose a good litmus test in a way. I also wondered, since you've done zero carb, have you measured your lean body mass in an accurate way, like via a DEXA scan or bod pod or something like that? Have you tried that at all?
I haven't, and maybe I should to satisfy other people's curiosity. I haven't measured really anything labs. Literally. I mean, if you follow on Twitter, I mean, literally every week somebody says, what's your lab value of this or that, or testosterone level, or your HDL level, or your ferritin level. So I haven't done a lot of testing. I mean, the things I look at are really performance based, and I look at my my performance in the gym, and I'm meticulous about how I record that, and then I look at these rowing world record times, and so that's, to me, what I'm clinically interested in right now. I think certainly I think if other people are more interested in doing that, and that's one of the things I'm trying to promote. I'm trying to get. I just put out an email or request for emails for people that be interested in a zero carb experiment. And then we're going to, we can kind of figure out what things we can measure, what things we can afford to measure, because some of that's going to be on how much funding we have. There's some things we can do for free, which I think are certainly worth doing. But there's a lot of people out there that are interested in some of these lab data, and I just don't have a lot of. When I define health, I just don't define it in terms of lab. But I do think body composition is pretty important. I mean, I put up pictures of what I sort of look like from time to time, and if I had to guess, I'd say I'm in the 10 to 12% body fat range. I guess everybody says they're 8% body fat when they're really 15, and so it's hard to say. But I mean, I think if you look up there's a picture of me, you would say I'm relatively lean, and so that's where I'm at. So that's all I can tell you about my body composition.
Now, that's a very open-minded way of looking at the variables that other variables that can matter. Along the same lines, I'm going to guess because I remember what you said to me before, you're eating sort of 4 to 5 pounds of meat every day. So is your protein intake probably around the 200 gram mark?
No. It would probably be closer to 400 grams a day.
Wow.
Yeah, this every pound of meat has about 100 grams in it, and so depending on the cut, so that's a rough guide. And I don't, I guess if I'm really curious, I can look it up, and I think I have, but it's somewhere 350 to 450 grams per day most days, which is well above. My lean body mass is probably about 215 pounds. I'm 240-ish, and so that's almost 2 grams per pound on some days, and so the question becomes. Am I wasting all that protein? Is all that going down the toilet? Am I converting it all to sort of urea and so I don't think so. I mean, I think the consequences of that would be two things. Either it's all turning into, some people say it turns into sugar via gluconeogenesis, and in that case, I would probably be gaining weight and getting fatter. Or I'm wasting it all, and then in that case, I would probably be losing weight, but I'm weight stable on that. And so, it's, it comes back to we're all animals and we have an appetite for a reason, and that's what I perceive what I need to eat to allow me to function. the way I do. It's the same thing. If you look at a lion, and they're mammals, lions will eat. If you look on a per kilo basis, they'll eat more than I do. On a per kilo basis, I believe. And so, I mean, why do they do that? It doesn't make sense for them to be efficient. Why eat more food than you need? And they eat till they're full, basically, and then the next time they're hungry, they eat again. And so that's what I do. And if I were wasting all that food, you would argue that that's not a very well designed system. And I think we're pretty well designed after millions of years of evolution.
So you're kind of you're like we talked this before. You're just operating very intuitively. You eat too full, and then it's like, and if you consume more protein than people are saying you should, then well, it's just a byproduct of you eating as much as you feel you need. You're not trying to get that much protein.
No. I'm trying to eat. I'm eating until I'm eating while I'm hungry. Like today, I think I posted this just before our little session here today. I had 2.5 pounds of short. Which is that's going to be 200 plus grams of protein right there. That's part of my intake for the day. And I know that because I'm going to train later today, and so I want to have something. We talked about fasted training versus not fasted training, but I think if my goal were just fat loss right now, then I might opt for more fasted training, but that's not what I'm shooting for right now. But yeah, I mean, I just eat to appetite, and I think that you can make the argument if you make the argument that humans are just another animal species, which I think clearly we are, and then we should have a diet that we can all eat. It's just individual. Every person needs a different diet. I mean, I just don't see that as a survival benefit as a species. It's not like every giraffe has to have a special diet, or have to have their own special treat because they would all die. I mean, it's just not possible. And so if we make there's this movement towards personalized nutrition and personalized everything. I mean, we are all one species. And is there a diet that we can all eat? I think there is. I think we've all, at least some point in our history, we've all had meat in our diet. And some of us, it's been all meat. Some of it's been mostly meat. Some of it's been, at least some meat. And so we know that for the people that live on all meat, that it's sufficient. And I mean, there's, you can sort of question the veracity of what evolution shows or what the historical accounts show. But there are people in 2017 like myself that are thriving on an all meat diet. And so it is sufficient and it is complete nutrition. And so if I can do it, most likely you can do it and somebody else can do it. It's just a matter of kind of putting aside those cultural sort of beliefs and some of the science. I'll put quotes around the science that's been sort of forced upon us. And then, and then if that's the case, then our hunger should dictate how much we eat. And I think that's just like any other animal. And so, you can make it super complicated, count macros, count calories, count micronutrients, nutrient timing, food combining, the list goes on and on and on. And really, I just consider eating like breathing. I mean, it's something we do and we're designed to do, and it shouldn't be hard.
I think that was a great note to finish on. And I find it so inspiring, and I think your argument is very convincing, and I'm looking forward to experimenting more in zero carb and just having that kind of approach to life in general. But no, look, Sean, thanks for coming on the show again. I appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure talking to you again. What's the best way for people to contact you? Is it the Twitter handle, or is there other methods these days?
Yeah, so I think I'll give you Twitter, which was SBakerMD. There's an Instagram, which I've got. It's kind of fun. My Instagram's got a lot of rowers because they're interested because I'm breaking all these world records and I'm eating meat, and they're like, "What the hell?" And so there's a lot of top level rowers now that have sort of are kind of studying me, I think, and I think some of them maybe possibly interested in it. So Instagram is Sean Baker 1967, and then I just set up a sort of an email. Or sort of an email for this N equals many thing that we're going to work on. So if you're interested in participating in these experiments, helping with design, helping with administration, or even donating, there's a Gmail account called N equals many, just all spelled out, and then at gmail.com. And so what we're trying to do is see what kind of level, if there's an interest for this. I think there is. And if there is, we'll sort of proceed forward with sort of developing hopefully the software to allow us to collect the data, and then I'll sort of consolidate that and start generating information for people. And hopefully we can get enough people that are interested so we can really sort of answer these questions with big numbers and see what happens.
Awesome. That sounds really, really fascinating. I'm really glad to see you doing stuff like that and doing the book, and really excited to see some of this stuff come to fruition, and definitely read the book. But yeah, so to find the show notes for this episode and all episodes, please go to 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/podcast. That's 15minutescorporatewarrior.com/podcast. And until next time, guys, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Before you head off, head on over to corpwarrior.com to get your free ebook with 6 interview transcripts with some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill DeSimone, on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. These transcripts are not verbatim, deliberately. Instead, they've been transcribed in an easy read format to make it more enjoyable and easier for you to quickly pick out what you need and start getting results. To get your ebook, head on over to corpwarrior.com, that's CORP warrior.com, and enter your email address. Then check your email for an email from me with a confirmation link. Once you click the link, you'll be instantly redirected to a PDF version of the transcripts.